Okay, imagine this. A creature. It looks exactly like you, talks like you, behaves like you, every little detail. But, and here's the kicker, inside. Absolutely nothing. No joy, no pain, no conscious experience at all. Sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, doesn't it? Well, for philosophers, this isn't just some spooky thought experiment. It's actually a key player in a huge debate about consciousness itself. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of philosophical zombies, or P-zombies as they're often called. We'll unpack what they are, why they're such a powerful philosophical tool, and surprisingly, how they link up with the future of AI.
Yeah, this P-zombie idea, it really forces you to grapple with what we even mean by consciousness and why it's so incredibly hard to explain how subjective feelings, emerge from just physical stuff, brains, neurons. It's often called the hard problem of consciousness, and it's a puzzle it's been around for centuries. So our goal today is really to explore the arguments both for and against the possibility of these duplicates that are dark inside, and think about what that means for how we understand minds, machines, maybe even ourselves.
That image is definitely unsettling, a twin with no inner life. But let's get specific. Beyond the sci-fi feel, what exactly is a philosophical zombie in, the academic sense?
Right. So at its core, a philosophical zombie is a hypothetical being. Physically, it's identical to a normal person, molecule for molecule. But it completely lacks conscious experience, qualia, subjective feeling. So if you say, poked a pea zombie with something sharp, it would react just like you or I would. It might wince, pull back its hand, maybe even yell, ouch!
But it wouldn't actually feel pain.
Exactly. There would be, as philosophers put it, nothing it is like to be that zombie. No inner experience of pain whatsoever.
Okay. And this idea, it's not completely new, is it? Who first brought these zombies into the philosophical discussion?
Well, it's very strongly associated with David Chalmers. He really developed and popularized it in his 1996 book, The Conscious Mind.
Right. That book made a huge splash.
It really did. But the philosopher Robert Kirk actually used the term zombie in this way back in 1974.
That far back.
Yeah, and even a bit earlier, Keith Campbell in 1970 used a similar concept, calling it an imitation man. And the idea's evolved, Now philosophers distinguish different types, like a behavioral zombie that's just outwardly identical, or a neurological zombie that has an identical brain, too. There's even this really mind-bending idea of a zombie world, an entire universe physically identical to ours, just without any consciousness in it.
Wow. Okay, so if we can even conceive of such a being, if we can imagine it coherently,
Yeah.
what's the philosophical punchline? What does that imply? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
This is the core of the argument, yeah. Especially as championed by Chalmers. It basically goes like this. If we can coherently conceive of a world that's physically identical to ours, same atoms, same laws, but lacks conscious experience, then consciousness must be something extra, something non-physical, something beyond just the physical facts.
Meaning physicalism, the idea that everything is physical would have to be false.
Precisely. If your physical duplicate could exist without your consciousness, then consciousness isn't fully explained by the physical. And this links directly to what Chalmers calls the hard problem. How does non-conscious matter, like brain tissue, give rise to subjective experience? Why is it like something to see red or hear that piece of music, that subjective quality, the what it's like, imness, qualia?
So the argument hinges on conceivability implies possibility. If I can think it up without it sounding like nonsense, it could be metaphysically possible.
That's the crux of it, yes. And this line of thought experiment also branches out. You get ideas like inverted qualia. Maybe you and I have identical brains looking at a strawberry, but my experience of red is like your experience of blue.
How would we ever know?
Exactly. Or absent qualia, which is like partial zombiehood. Maybe someone lacks just one type of subjective experience. These variations are used to stress that same gap, the gap between physical facts and subjective qualitative experience. Philosopher Amy Kind uses an analogy of a counterfeit $20 bill. It's logically possible, she says, to make a counterfeit that's physically identical to a real one. Every fiber, every ink mark. But it still wouldn't be a real $20 bill. It lacks the proper history or standing. The argument is similar. Phenomenal facts about what experience is like, can't be fully captured just by listing physical facts. There's an explanatory gap.
Okay, but surely not everyone buys this. What are the main pushbacks?
Yeah.
Is the whole idea of a P-zombie actually incoherent? Or is the problem with that conceivability implies possibility step?
Right, there's significant pushback. Many critics, Daniel Dennett is probably the most prominent, they argue that P-zombies are actually logically incoherent. Impossible, even in principle.
So
Their point is, look, If a being acts and responds identically to a conscious human in every single situation, including, crucially, talking about its feelings, reporting thoughts, seeming introspective, then it just must be conscious. To really imagine something behaving perfectly like us, saying, I feel sad when appropriate, but having no inner life, Dennett argues you're basically trying to imagine a contradiction.
So the behavior itself, especially the reporting of inner states, is seen as inseparable from the consciousness.
Yes. Dennett even coined this term Zimbos. These are hypothetical P-zombies who somehow also think they are conscious and reflect on their own supposedly non-existent qualia. He uses this to show how the concept kind of ties itself in knots if you push it.
So a big part of the counter is that just because we think we can imagine it doesn't mean it's genuinely possible.
Absolutely. That's a major line of attack. Sean Carroll, the physicist, makes this point quite strongly. He gives the example. Ask someone 10,000 years ago, is it conceivable there's a largest prime number? They might easily say, sure, why not?
But mathematically, we know that's impossible. There are infinitely many primes.
Exactly. Or think about squaring the circle with geometry. People conceived of it for ages, tried to do it. Later, it was proven impossible. So Carroll argues that appealing to conceivability here is maybe just leveraging a kind of fuzziness in our imagination to reach these really big conclusions about metaphysics. Another really critical point is about the causal role of consciousness. If consciousness doesn't do anything, if it has no effect on our physical behavior, which it must not, if a zombie behaves identically without it, then what is it? It becomes what philosophers call an epiphenomenon, like the humming noise a computer makes. It happens, but it doesn't affect the computations. Consciousness would be causally irrelevant.
But wait, going back to the zombie saying, I am conscious or I feel pain, that is a behavior, a physical output of sound waves. How do critics handle that specific point if the feeling doesn't cause the words?
Yeah, this is often where the debate gets really heated. Look, if I say I'm sad, presumably I'm saying it at least partly because I actually feel sad. My inner state influences my verbal behavior. A P-zombie, by definition, also says I'm sad in exactly the same circumstances, but feels nothing. So for critics like Carroll, this seems to break the whole idea. If the experience of sadness doesn't influence the report of sadness, then what on earth are we even talking about when we talk about consciousness? It seems to imply that zombies must be either, I don't know, constant liars or maybe profoundly confused about their own internal state.
And if they could be confused,
Yeah.
maybe we could be. That's a bit disturbing.
It does open that unsettling door. Yeah. And some philosophers like Marvin Minsky or Gualtiero Bettini argue the whole zombie argument is kind of circular. It sort of assumes the separation between physical states and consciousness that it's trying to prove. Plus, many physicalists just believe that, look, as neuroscience progresses, we will close that explanatory gap.
Yeah.
We'll eventually understand how physical brain processes do generate subjective experience, making the whole P-zombie idea kind of unnecessary. OTOs.
Okay, this feels like pretty deep, maybe abstract philosophical territory.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a connection to AI and robots. How does this P-zombie thought experiment actually connect to, the real-world advancements we're seeing in AI?
It connects very directly, actually. The P-zombie is basically the philosophical blueprint for a question that's becoming increasingly urgent with AI. Can we build an advanced AI, maybe a robot, that behaves exactly like a conscious being, talks, responds, maybe even shows empathy, but still lacks any genuine subjective experience? Is it just mimicking? The thought experiment forces us to ask, is perfect behavioral imitation enough to guarantee consciousness? Think about the Turing test, for example. If a machine passes every behavioral test we can throw at it, could it still be completely dark inside, like a P-zombie? If P-zombies are metaphysically possible, then yeah, it seems conceivable you could have an AI that acts conscious without being conscious.
And that really challenges some core ideas in AI and cognitive science, like functionalism, right?
Exactly. Functionalism is a pretty dominant view. It basically says consciousness is about what the system does, its functional organization, how it processes information. The specific physical stuff it's made of, whether it's neurons or silicon chips, doesn't fundamentally matter as long as it performs the same functions. P-zombies are a direct challenge to that. If you can have two systems with the exact same functional organization, say a human brain and a P-zombie brain, but only one has conscious experience, then functionalism seems incomplete. Consciousness isn't just function.
So it leads to these ideas about robot zombies.
Precisely. Advanced AIs that perfectly replicate human outcomes, maybe even claim to have feelings, but are considered by some to lack any actual subjective inner life. It forces us to confront. If an AI becomes truly indistinguishable from us in its behavior, including claiming consciousness, how could we ever really know if it's genuine or just an incredibly sophisticated simulation? This isn't just abstract anymore. It's central to discussions about machine consciousness, potential AI rights, or personhood. It touches on really deep ethical questions about how we'll relate to these future machines.
It's fascinating how these philosophical tools help us frame those future problems. And the P-zombie isn't alone in this, is it? There are other famous thought experiments that poke at these same questions about consciousness and the physical world.
Oh, yeah, it's part of a whole family of these intuition pumps, as Dennett calls them. There's Frank Jackson's famous knowledge argument featuring Mary, the color scientist. Mary knows literally everything physical about color vision, neuroscience, physics of light, all of it. But she's lived her whole life in a black and white room. She's never actually seen color.
Right. The question is, when she finally walks out and sees a red rose for the first time, does she learn something new?
Exactly. If she does learn something new, what it's like to see red, then the physical facts alone weren't the whole story. Again, it points to that gap, especially regarding qualia. Then you've got things like Donald Davidson's Swamp Man. Imagine lightning strikes a swamp and accidentally, randomly assembles a perfect physical duplicate of, say, you, molecule for molecule.
Okay. Weird, but conceivable, I guess.
This swamp man wanders out, behaves exactly like you, seems to recognize your friends, talks about your memories, but it has none of your actual history. It just popped into existence. Does it have the same thoughts, the same beliefs? Is it really you in some sense? It probes the role of history and origin and identity and mine, and of course John Searle's Chinese room argument.
Ah, yes. The person locked in a room manipulating Chinese symbols based on rules without understanding any Chinese.
Right. Searle uses it to argue that just manipulating symbols according to rules, like a computer program does, isn't the same as genuine understanding or consciousness. Syntax isn't semantics. All these thought experiments, like P-zombies, they're designed to push our intuitions, challenge our assumptions about mind, matter, understanding, and experience.
Okay, so I've covered a lot of ground, some really complex ideas. Let's bring it back. What does all this mean for you listening right now? Why should you care about philosophical zombies if you're not, a professional philosopher?
Well, even though it sounds abstract, this kind of deep dive really forces us to confront some fundamental questions that actually have pretty real-world echoes. Think about how we decide who or what is conscious in the world around us. We all generally agree other humans are conscious, right? But what about animals? Is your dog conscious? Most people would say yes. Okay, what about a cat, a bird? What about a spider? Or an octopus with its incredibly different distributed nervous system? Where does consciousness kind of fade out? We don't have a clear line, and the P-zombie idea highlights why it's so hard. Behavior alone might not be the full picture.
And you mentioned human development, too.
Exactly. A human embryo clearly isn't conscious in the way we are, but a newborn baby, we assume, is. Somewhere in between, during gestation or maybe shortly after birth, consciousness seems to switch on. We don't really understand that transition at all. So in a way, these are like real-world zombie issues. We're constantly having to make judgments about the presence or absence of consciousness without fully grasping what it is or how it's generated. The very fact that we have this hard problem, as the physicist Brian Greene points out, shows a pretty critical gap in our scientific story of the universe. There's something fundamental missing in our explanation.
But many scientists and philosophers in the physicalist camp remain optimistic, don't they? They believe the hard problem might eventually just dissolve as we learn more.
Yes, definitely. Thinkers like Dennett or Sean Carroll again, they tend to argue that consciousness isn't some extra spooky ingredient. It's more like a complex process or an emergent property of incredibly intricate systems like our brains. Their bet is that as neuroscience gets sophisticated enough, as we truly map out the billions of neurons and their trillions of connections and understand their dynamics, we'll understand so well what's happening when someone reports seeing red or feeling sad that the feeling of mystery will just evaporate. The problem will seem ill-posed.
So understanding the mechanism might make the what it's like question seem less mysterious.
That's the hope for many physicalists. But regardless of whether you find P-zombies genuinely conceivable or think they're impossible, the thought experiment itself has been incredibly successful. It's really sharpened the focus on these incredibly difficult questions about mind and matter. It pushes us right to the edge of understanding what it means to experience the world, and maybe what it will mean for the artificial minds or sophisticated mimics of the future.
We've certainly journeyed through a fascinating and, sometimes pretty unsettling conceptual landscape today. From that core idea of a consciousness-less double right up to the frontiers of AI, the philosophical zombie really does stretch our thinking about being alive and aware.
Absolutely. And that core tension remains, doesn't it? Between our own undeniable first-person subjective experience, the what it's like, and the scientific drive to explain everything in objective physical terms. As neuroscience gets better and AI potentially becomes behaviorally indistinguishable from us, that question gets sharper. Will we ever be able to truly distinguish simulation from genuine consciousness? Or, as some philosophers hope, will our deepening understanding actually change the question itself, maybe revealing consciousness as something inherent in certain kinds of complex information processing, rather than some extra spark?
Definitely something to mull over. We hope this deep dive has given you plenty to think about and maybe inspired you to look at the inner world your own and perhaps others with a little fresh curiosity. Until next time, keep that curiosity ignited.